Chapter 46. A handful of Simsapa leaves. Venavana Monastery in Rajagaha, Kutagarasama Monastery in Vasali, and Jetavana Monastery in Savatthi had become thriving centers for the practice and teaching of the way. Other monastic centers had been founded throughout Magala, Kosala, and neighboring kingdoms. Everywhere the sight of saffron-robed bhikkhus had become familiar. The way of awakening had spread far and wide in the first 6 years after the Buddha's enlightenment. The Buddha spent his sixth rainy season retreat on Makula Mountain and the seventh season on Samkasa Mountain upstream from the Ganga. He spent the eighth season at Sumsum Maragira in Baga and the ninth near Kosambi. Kosambi was a large town in the kingdom of Vamsa, situated along the Jamuna River. An important monastery had been built there in a large forest called Gosira, named after the lay disciple who donated the forest. Senior disciples such as Mahakassapa, Mohammogalana, Sariputta, and Mahakakakana were not with the Buddha during the ninth rainy season retreat at Gosira. Ananda, however, was. Rahula remained with Sariputta. Gosira was filled with Simsapa trees, under which the Buddha liked to meditate during hot afternoons. One day, after his meditation, he returned to the community holding a handful of Simsapa leaves. He held them up and asked the bhikkhus, which is greater, the number of leaves in my hand or the number of leaves in the forest? The bhikkhus answered, the number of leaves in the forest. The Buddha answered, just so. What I see is much greater than what I teach. Why? Because I teach only those things that are truly necessary and helpful in attaining the way. The Buddha said this because at Gosira there were many bhikkhus who tended to lose themselves in philosophical speculation. Bhikkhu Malunkyaputta had been specially advised by the Buddha not to entangle himself in esoteric questions that were not essential for the practice. This was because Malunkyaputta had a habit of asking the Buddha such questions as whether the universe was finite or infinite, temporal or eternal. The Buddha always refused to answer such questions. One day, Malunkyaputta felt he could no longer endure the Buddha's silence. He resolved that he would ask the Buddha his questions one last time, and if the Buddha still refused to answer him, he would ask to be relieved of his vows as a bhikkhu. He found the Buddha and said, Teacher, if you will agree to answer my questions, I will continue to follow you. If you refuse, I will abandon the sangha. Tell me if you know whether or not the universe is finite or infinite. If you don't know the answer, just say so. The Buddha looked at Malunkyaputta and said, when you asked to be ordained, did I promise to answer such questions? Did I say, Malunkyaputta, become a bhikkhu, and I will solve your metaphysical problems? No, Lord, you did not. Then why do you demand me to do so now? Malunkyaputta, you are like a person shot with a poisoned arrow, whose family summons the doctor to have the arrow removed, and the man given an antidote. But the man refuses to let the doctor do anything before certain questions can be answered. The wounded man demands to know who shot the arrow, what his caste and job is, and why he shot him. He wants to know what kind of bow the man used and how he acquired the ingredients used in preparing the poison. Malunkyaputta, such a man will die before getting the answers to his questions. It is no different for one who follows the way. I teach only those things necessary to realize the way. Things which are not helpful or necessary, I do not teach. Malunkyaputta, whether the universe is finite or infinite, temporal or eternal, there is one truth you must accept, and that is the presence of suffering. Suffering has causes which can be illuminated in order to be removed. The things I teach will help you attain detachment, equanimity, peace, and liberation. I refuse to speak about all those things which are not helpful in realizing the way. Feeling ashamed, Malunkyaputta asked the Buddha to forgive him for making such a foolish demand. The Buddha encouraged all the bhikkhus to focus on their practice and avoid using philosophical speculation and debate. Gosira, the lay disciple who donated the forest, also sponsored the building of two other monasteries, Kukuta and Pavarikambhavana. A fourth monastery was also built in the region and called Badirika. At Gosira, as at all the other monasteries, certain bhikkhus were assigned the task of memorizing the teachings of the Buddha. They were called sutra masters, as the words of the Buddha were called sutras. One was the sutra on turning the wheel of Dharma, the discourse given to the Buddha's 5 first disciples in the deer park. A few sutras, such as the sutra on the nature of the non-self, the sutra on dependent co-arising, and the sutra on the Noble Eightfold Path, were memorized and recited twice monthly by the entire community of bhikkhus. In addition to sutra masters, there were precept masters, who were expert in the different precepts for novices and ordained bhikkhus. Rahula and other novices who had not yet reached 20 years of age followed what were called the Samanera precepts. That year at Gosira, a conflict arose between a sutra master and a precept master. Their argument stemmed from a small event, but ended up creating a sharp division in the sangha. A sutra master forgot to clean out the wash basin he had used and was charged with a violation of a lesser precept by a precept master. The sutra master was a proud person and contended that since he had not intentionally left the basin dirty, he was not to blame. Students of each bhikkhu took the side of their own teacher, and the argument escalated. One side accused the other of slander, while the other side accused their opponents of acting foolishly. Finally, the precept master publicly announced that the sutra master's transgression and forbade him from attending the bi-weekly precepts recitation ceremony until he formally confessed before the sangha. The situation grew more and more intense. Both sides spoke ill of each other. Their words flew like poisoned arrows. Most of the other bhikkhus took sides, although naturally there were some who refused to take either side. They said, "This is terrible. This will only create harmful division in the sangha." Though the Buddha was residing not far from the monastery, he was unaware of the conflict until a delegation of concerned bhikkhus visited him, told him of it, and asked him to intervene. The Buddha went to meet directly with the precept master and told him, "We should not become too attached to our own viewpoint. We should listen carefully in order to understand the other's viewpoint. We should seek all means to prevent the community from breaking." Then he went to the sutra master and said the same things. Returning to his hut, he was hopeful the two men would reconcile. But the Buddha's intervention did not have the desired effect. Too many ill words had already been spoken. Many wounds had been inflicted. The bhikkhus who remained impartial did not possess enough influence to bring the two sides together. The conflict reached the ears of the lay disciples, and before long even other religious sects had heard of the trouble in the Buddha's sangha. It was a serious blow to the integrity of the sangha. Nagita, the Buddha's attendant, was unable to endure the situation any more. He discussed the matter again with the Buddha, beseeching him to intervene once more. The Buddha put on his outer robe and went at once to the monastery's meeting hall. Nagita rang the bell to summon the community. When all were present, the Buddha said, "Please cease your arguing. It is only creating division in the community. Please return to your practice. If we truly follow our practice, we will not become victims of pride and anger." One bhikkhu stood up and said, "Master, please don't involve yourself in this matter. Return and dwell peacefully in your meditation. This matter does not concern you. We are adults and capable of resolving this on our own." Dead silence followed the bhikkhu's words. The Buddha stood up and left the meeting hall. He returned to his hut, picked up his bowl, and walked down into Kosambi to beg. When he finished begging, he entered the forest to eat alone. Then he stood up and walked out of Kosambi. He headed for the river. He did not tell anyone of his departure, not even his attendant Nagita or Venerable Ananda. The Buddha walked until he reached the town of Balakalonikaragama. There he met his disciple, the Venerable Bhagu. Bhagu invited him into the forest where he dwelled alone. He offered the Buddha a towel and wash basin to wash his face and hands. The Buddha asked Bhagu how his practice was going. Bhagu replied that he found great ease and joy in the practice, even though he was presently dwelling all alone. The Buddha remarked, "Sometimes it is more pleasant to live alone than with many people." After bidding Bhagu farewell, the Buddha headed for eastern bamboo forest, which was not far away. As he was about to enter the forest, the groundkeeper stopped him and said, "Monk, don't go in there, or you may disturb the monks already practicing in there." Before the Buddha could think of a response, Venerable Anuruddha appeared. He happily greeted the Buddha and said to the groundskeeper, "This is my own teacher. Please allow him to enter." Anuruddha led the Buddha into the forest where he lived with two other bhikkhus, Nandira and Kimbila. They were very happy to see the Buddha. Nandira took the Buddha's bowl and Kimbila took his outer robe. They cleared a place for him to sit by a thicket of gold bamboo. They brought a towel and wash basin. The three bhikkhus joined their palms and bowed to the Buddha. The Buddha asked them to be seated, and he asked, "Are you content here? How is your practice going? Do you encounter any difficulties in begging or sharing the teaching in this region?" Anuruddha answered, "Lord, we are very content here. It is calm and peaceful. We receive ample food offerings and are able to share the Dharma. We are all making progress in our practice." The Buddha asked, "Do you live in harmony with one another?" Anuruddha said, "Lord, we care deeply for each other. We live in harmony like milk and honey. I consider living with Nandira and Kimbila a great blessing. I treasure their friendship. Before I say or do anything, whether they are present or not, I stop and ask myself what their reaction would be. Would my words or actions disappoint my brothers in any way? If I feel any doubts, I refrain from the words or actions intended. Lord, although we are three persons, we are also one." The Buddha nodded his approval. He looked at the other two bhikkhus. Kimbila said, "Anuruddha speaks the truth. We live in harmony and care deeply for each other." Nandira added, "We share all things from our food to our insight and experience." The Buddha praised them. "Excellent. I'm most pleased to see how you live in harmony. A sangha is only a true sangha when such harmony exists. You have experienced real awakening, and that is why you have realized such harmony." The Buddha spent 1 month with the three bhikkhus. He observed how they went begging every morning after meditation. Whichever bhikkhu returned first from begging always prepared a place for the others to sit, gathered water for washing, and set out an empty bowl. Before he ate anything himself, he would place some of his food into the empty bowl, in case one of his brothers had not received any food. After they had all finished eating, they placed any leftover food on the ground or in the stream, careful not to harm any creatures that lived there. Then they washed their bowls together. Whoever saw that the toilet needed scrubbing did it at once. They joined together to do any tasks that required more than one person. They sat down regularly to share insights and experiences. Before the Buddha left the three bhikkhus, he spoke to them. "Bhikkhus, the very nature of a sangha is harmony. I believe harmony can be realized by following these principles. 1. Sharing a common space, such as a forest or home. 2. Sharing the essentials of daily life together. 3. Observing the precepts together. 4. Using only words that contribute to harmony, avoiding all words that cause the community to break. 5. Sharing insights and understanding together. 6. Respecting others' viewpoints and not forcing another to follow your own viewpoint. A sangha that follows these principles will have happiness and harmony. Bhikkhus, let us always observe these 6 principles. The bhikkhus were happy to receive this teaching from the Buddha. The Buddha bid them farewell and walked until he reached Rakkhita Forest near Parilagyaka. After sitting in meditation beneath a lush sal tree, he decided to spend the approaching rainy season alone in the forest. Chapter 47. Follow the Dharma. Beneath the sal tree, the Buddha enjoyed ease, peace, and joy. It was a lovely forest of green hills, clear springs, and a lake. The Buddha enjoyed the solitude. He thought of the bhikkhus in Kosambi, living in conflict. Even the lay disciples had been disturbed. He felt sad that the bhikkhus were unwilling to listen to his guidance, but he understood their minds were clouded by anger. The Buddha encountered many animals in Rakkhita Forest, including a family of elephants. The eldest female, the matriarch queen, often led the young elephants to the lake to bathe. She taught them how to drink the cool water and eat water lilies. The Buddha watched how she grasped a bunch of lilies with her trunk and rinsed them in the water in order to shake off any mud still clinging to them. The little elephants imitated her. The elephants grew fond of the Buddha and became his friends. Sometimes the queen picked fruit and offered it to the Buddha. The Buddha liked to pat the heads of the elephant calves, and he often walked with them down to the lake. He liked to listen to the queen's majestic call. It sounded like a great trumpet. He practiced until he could imitate her call perfectly. Once, when the queen called out, he also gave a great trumpeting call. She gazed at him and then came and knelt before him as if to bow. The Buddha gently stroked her head. It was the 10th retreat season since the Buddha's enlightenment, but only the second one he spent alone. He stayed in the cool forest the entire retreat season, leaving only briefly in the mornings to beg. When the rainy season came to an end, the Buddha departed from his elephant friends and headed northeast. After 2 weeks of walking, he reached Jetavana Monastery in Savatthi. Sariputta was most happy to see him, as was Rahula. Several senior disciples were also there, including Mahamoggallana, Mahakassapa, Mahakakara, Upali, Mahakotiya, Mahakapino, Mahakunda, Rivata, and Devidata. Anuruddha, Kimbila, and Nadia had also travelled to Jetavana from their bamboo grove in Karagama. Even Bhikkhuni Gautami was in Savatthi. Everyone rejoiced to see the Buddha. When he entered his hut at Jetavana, the Buddha found Ananda tidying up and sweeping the floor. A year and 4 months had passed since the Buddha had last been there. Ananda put down his broom and bowed. The Buddha asked him about the situation in Kosambi, and Ananda replied, "After your departure, a number of brothers came to me and said, 'Brother, the master has left. He is all alone. Why don't you follow him and act as his assistant? If you won't go, we will go ourselves.' But I told them, if the Buddha has departed without telling anyone, it is because he wants to be alone. We should not bother him." 6 months later, the same brothers came to me and said, "Brother, it has been a long time since we received any direct teaching from the Buddha. We want to search for him." This time I agreed, and we set out looking for you, but without success. No one knew where you were. At last we made our way to Savatthi, but you were not here either. We decided to wait here, knowing that eventually you would come. We were confident you would not abandon your disciples. When you left Kosambi, What was the situation like? Were the bhikkhus still divided? Lord, the conflict became even worse. Neither side would have anything to do with the other. The atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable. Lay disciples expressed their dismay to the rest of us when we went begging in the city. We explained that many of us refused to take sides. Little by little, the lay disciples decided to take the matters more into their own hands. They came to the monastery and spoke to the bhikkhus involved in the conflict. They said things like, "You made the Buddha so sad he left. You bear a grave responsibility. You have caused many lay disciples to lose trust in the sangha. Please reconsider your actions." At first, the bhikkhus involved in the conflict did not pay attention to the lay disciples. But then the lay disciples decided not to offer food to any bhikkhu involved in the conflict. They said, "You're not worthy of the Buddha because you are unable to live in harmony. If you listen to the Buddha's teaching, you would reconcile with one another and then go find the Buddha and make a confession. Only by doing so can you regain our trust." Lord, the lay disciples stood their ground. The day I left Kosambi, the two sides had agreed to meet together. I'm sure that before long they will come here to make a formal confession. The Buddha picked up the broom which Ananda had set down. "Let me do that. Please find Sariputta and tell him I would like to speak with him." The Buddha leisurely swept the hut and then sat on one of his bamboo chairs outside. Jetavana was truly beautiful. The trees were covered with new leaves. Birds sang throughout the forest. Sariputta appeared and sat silently beside the Buddha for a long, peaceful moment. The Buddha told Sariputta what was on his mind. We should do everything we can to prevent useless conflicts from arising in this beautiful monastery. They spoke on this matter for a long time. One afternoon soon after, Venerable Sariputta received news that the bhikkhus from Kosambi were on their way to the monastery. Having already arrived in Savatthi, Sariputta went to the Buddha and asked him, "The brothers from Kosambi will soon arrive. How should we handle the situation?" The Buddha replied, "Handle it according to the Dharma." "Can you explain what you mean more clearly?" "You, Sariputta, can still ask such a question?" Sariputta fell silent. Just then Moggallana, Kassapa, Kakakana, Kotaya, Kapina, and Anuruddha appeared. They too asked, "How should we handle the arrival of the brothers from Kosambi?" They all looked at Sariputta, but he only smiled. The Buddha looked at his senior disciples and said, "Listen carefully to both sides without prejudice. Carefully consider everything you hear to determine which things are in accord with the teaching and which things are not. Things in accord with the teaching lead to peace, joy, and liberation. They are the things I myself practice. Things I have cautioned against and which I do not practice are not in accord with the teaching. When you understand what things are in accord with the teaching and what things are not, you will know how to help both sides find reconciliation." At that moment, a number of lay patrons led by Anathapindika arrived at the Buddha's hut. They said, "Lord, the bhikkhus from Kosambi have arrived. How should we receive them? Should we give both sides food offerings?" The Buddha smiled. "Offer food to both sides. Express your support of the sangha. Offer your praise when any of them say things in accord with the Dharma." Ananda returned and announced to Sariputta that the bhikkhus from Kosambi were already at the monastery gates. Sariputta turned to the Buddha and asked, "Shall we let them enter now?" The Buddha said, "Open the gates and welcome them." Sariputta said, "I will arrange places for them all to sleep. Let the two sides dwell in separate locations for the time being. We may have difficulty finding adequate places for everyone to sleep. We can endure crowded conditions for now, but don't make any of the elders sleep outdoors. Distribute food and medicine equally to all." Sariputta issued orders for the gates to be opened. The Kosambi bhikkhus were given places to sleep and provided basic necessities. The following morning, the newly arrived bhikkhus were told to go out begging as usual. Sariputta divided them into groups and sent them to different locales as the Buddha had counselled. That evening, the bhikkhus asked Sariputta to arrange a meeting with the Buddha in order for them to make a confession. Sariputta said, "Making a confession to the Buddha is not the most important thing. You must first achieve true reconciliation. Only if reconciliation has taken place will the ceremony of confession have meaning." That night, the sutra master responsible for starting the conflict by his refusal to be corrected went to the precept master. He joined his palms and bowed. Then he knelt in front of the precept master and said, "Venerable, I accept that I violated a precept. It was proper for you to correct me. I am ready to make confession before the sangha." The sutra master knew that the only way to resolve the conflict was to swallow his pride. The precept master responded by kneeling before the sutra master and saying, "I confess that I too lacked humility and tact. Please accept my sincere apologies." Late that night, a confession ceremony was held for the sutra master. Everyone gave a sigh of relief, especially the Kosambi bhikkhus, who had remained impartial throughout the conflict. It was after midnight when Sariputta informed the Buddha that reconciliation had finally taken place. The Buddha nodded silently. The conflict was ended, but he knew that it would take time for all the wounds to heal.